And I began working on this book that took me about 2.5 years of very obsessive writing every weekend, beginning, you know how sometimes we academics are, we begin with a book, we begin at 9 o'clock in the morning, 10 o'clock, and all of a sudden it's 7 in the evening and we don't know what happened to the day. That's the way it became, an obsession. And when I began telling some of my stories to the editor, he said they're fascinating. You have to write all those anecdotes because we don't want, remember, this is not an academic book. It has to be for general public so that Americans will be interested about this, about reading this book. So you have to make it entertaining and tell all these stories. And he said the first story has to be the one that Steve mentioned about the dynamite. And my first, the introduction, first chapter, says on 9/11/73, our 9/11, I almost became the first accidental suicide bomber in Chile. And that was because that day, when very early we knew that a coup was happening, I went to the Socialist Party headquarters in our neighborhood, and I was in charge of going and picking up some dynamite that we had stashed away just in case it was a coup, because it was sort of the writing was on the wall that a coup could occur. And I had some paramilitary training, and I was the explosives expert. So I went to pick up this dynamite at the house of a friend, and I had given him specific instruction on how to stash dynamite away, because the technical term is that dynamite can sweat. The sticks of dynamite can sweat. In other words, the nitroglycerin can seep out, and then the sticks can become highly unstable, and with any sudden movement they can explode. So I had said to this friend of mine, please put this away and change the packet of 4 sticks of dynamite wrapped in a cloth regularly, because otherwise, you know, there could be a problem here. And I arrived that day after months of it being stashed away, and I said, where's the dynamite? It says in the closet. I go, and the cloth is absolutely wet. And I yell at him and I said, didn't I tell you to turn it around? And he gave me some excuse. He was sort of half crying because of the coup and all that. And I thought, well, of course, as soon as I told him to put the dynamite away, he probably put it in a closet. I was so scared he never went to the closet, let alone turn it around. So there I was on 9/11/73, the day of the coup against Salvador Allende, with sticks of dynamite that I had to take. So I put them around my waist, I wrapped them up, and I had my .32 caliber gun on my waist. So there I was walking with my .32 caliber gun, with 4 sticks of dynamite that were highly unstable, and with trucks and trucks of military that went by in our neighborhood. And the rest of the story, you have to read the book to know what happened. But at that time, it was a very peculiar situation, because I had said goodbye to my wife, who is American, whom I had met in the United States, and she had accompanied this crazy Chilean to Chile. She had, first time she'd ever been outside the United States was to Montreal. The second time was to Chile. She did not speak a word of Spanish. We got married in Chile in month of November '72. In the morning, we got married. Then we went to have some coffee, see a boring Bulgarian movie, and in the afternoon we went to an Allende rally. And my mother still doesn't forgive me for supposedly being so unromantic, even though we were making a revolution, I explained. So that day was a very peculiar day. But I say this because we wanted to fight. I wanted to fight and resist the dictatorship, the coup. And we were supposed to receive weapons, serious weapons, because a .32 caliber gun has a reach of 50 meters. You can not fight with a .32 caliber gun and with useless sticks of dynamite, a military professional machinery, as it was of the, and is, the Chilean army. And those weapons never arrived, mainly because, and here's the issue, because Allende experience was a very radical experience from an ideological point, but it was always within the framework of legality, because after all, it was the Chilean road to socialism. This wasn't a civil war that many feared, and there were no weapons, and the left was not prepared to fight and resist. And that was something that was extremely frustrating in my own personal experience, but explains something that is very important. That day, only 36 people died in all of Chile, mainly those that were in the palace, and in some isolated instances of resistance. There was no confrontation, basically. As Pinochet himself said, in less than 24 hours, we had controlled the whole country, and indeed they had. But by the end of the year, this was 11th of September 1973, by the end of the year, 2,000 Chileans had died. So the point is, there was a massive and systematic repression that followed, which changed the lives of Chileans. We had lived in this idea that others had dictatorships, not Chile. We talked about the Central Americans dismissively, they are banana republics. In Chile, this can never happen. So we lost our sense of innocence at that moment. And what we attempted to do after Don Quixote having been defeated in Chile for the second time was to try to stay alive. And there are a lot of stories because I decided not to go into an embassy. There were several friends of mine who sought asylum in an embassy, and I thought I had to resist. I could not go into an embassy. So we went with my wife and did a lot of crazy things, put her in harm's way in many instances, and every time I have spoken about this book, I apologize to her, and even though she's not here, I apologize to her because of the crazy things I did to her. But the point is, there was a reaction on the part of Chileans that was to resist, but that was useless because the Pinochet became immediately a dictator that was extremely efficient in the repression. A repression to control the country, to eradicate Marxists, but not only Marxists, any dissident, and to control the armed forces. And this is the second point that I want to make. Pinochet was a pragmatic, and he knew that he was not the man who had organized the coup. Others had. He was an opportunist. He had gone to the coup at the last minute and forced by circumstances, because he was either going to join the coup or he was going to be swept aside. So much so that many forget that Pinochet was put in the post of commander-in-chief of the army by Allende, because he was thought to be loyal to the Constitution. And because he always played both sides. His career was like that since he was a young officer. He used to say that his best advice he had ever gotten was that in military school, you cannot be among the first, because you should not be among the first in your class. You should not be the last either. You should be somewhere in the bunch in the middle there, so that nobody notices you. Okay? And be friends to those above you and harsh to those below. This is the man who used to go on Sundays, while he was Army Commander-in-Chief, to visit and have drinks with the then Minister of Defense, Orlando Letelier, and would take presents to the kids of the Letelieres. And he had Letelier assassinated in 1976. So here it is a character, a very complex character, but clearly not an ideologue. So what happened is when